Hello and welcome to the Poetic Turn, where we talk about poetry, poets, and explore all things about poetry. We're from the point of view of enthusiasts mostly. We are not academics. We don't spend our days writing poetry as often or as much as our guest for today, Dan Smart, who writes a lot of poems and has written a lot of poems. Very happy to have him with us. He's going to help us explore a poem by Wallace Stevens. Like always, I am joined by my co-host, my fully 50-50 co-equal co-host, Evan Carlson. Hey, Evan, how are you?
Hello, I'm doing well. Beautiful day in Chicago today.
And welcome back, Dan Smart. You've been with us a few times now, and we thank you for your participation today and help us explore the poetry, this particular poem by Wallace Stevens. Evan had this idea of exploring the poem by Wallace Stevens, the poem which is called 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird, and a rather famous poem, but I was not familiar with it, and I'm not very familiar with the poetry of Wallace Stevens. But I like the idea of exploring a poet and a poem with which I'm not very familiar, and looking forward to having Dan's help.
Yeah. Well, I'm always interested in what poems the poets I like to read. You know, what are the things that inspired them to write the work that I love reading of them? And so, you know, when I reached out to Dan about, you know, perhaps finding a public domain poem that he really loves, this one stuck out, and you know, I've heard of it, I've read it before, but I've never dug super deeply into it. So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Is there something we should say ahead of time before we read the poem? What should we say?
Well, Dan, what made you choose this poem? What made you want to bring this on?
As you said earlier, part of the criteria was the public domain factor. But all that said, too, even if it wasn't, I would say this probably would have been one of the first poems that came to mind for me, because I think that Stevens is a super unique voice in particularly American poetry, but poetry generally. And I think that for me, he really opened up. Let me back up a little bit. So Stevens is usually one of those anthologized poets that a poem like 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird or Disillusionment of 10 O'Clock, or there's a couple quote unquote classic Stevens poems that will end up in, you know, high school textbooks and such. And Stevens' poems are he's a modernist. He's an early modernist. He's in that whole sort of school, but he is like famously arcane as well. Like a lot of his poems are willfully difficult, you know, as a lot of modernist texts tend to be.
You say willfully. Do you think he intends them to be difficult, or
well,
just the...
I think that the part of the modernist project as such was to sort of destabilize the idea of a clear interpretation of anything, and we can kind of we see that a little bit with this poem itself too, where there's one central image, but that idea is sort of exploded right off the bat because there is no one interpretation of this image,
and it's multiple. It comes across as multiple images. Yeah,
right. Yeah. The conceit, as it were, of the poem itself is that it's a fracturing of it's a destabilizing of the idea that there's one way to encounter reality, to describe reality, and I think that's sort of part and parcel of what a lot of those modernists were all about, with their sort of fractured narratives and heteroglossia and different narrators coming in, weaved amongst one another, absence centers, that kind of thing. So, which is all to say that it can sound a little heavy, I think, but for me, I remember being, you know, a college senior, 18 or so, and reading a poem like this and thinking like, oh, I get it. I see, like, this is not just a poem it's kind of a rubric in a way. It's a poem, but it's also like a kit for how poems work in a way, because
Interesting.
it really showed me. There's a way to deconstruct images, and then you can just you can iterate on this idea of what a thing is, and that itself can be a poem. And there's a mystic, there's sort of an Eastern quality to it as well. I think that the individual pieces of the poem are frankly they're very haiku like. I think he's influenced by haiku and Eastern approaches, and it's very mystical. There's a lot of sort of esoteric like mysticism and Gnosticism in Stevens' poems, and there's this whole strange marriage of nature and art and the imagination that is, I think, just illustrated beautifully in this poem. And it's just the simplest, blackbirds, crows. These are that's like a bird, man. That's like a that's the bird that like more poems have been written about crows and blackbirds and ravens and whatnot.
Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
I mean, it's a very like
Bye bye Blackbird. Yeah.
it's just it's an archetypal bird to write about. I think there's a lot of baggage to that. And then we have the number 13, which is a very occult number, and that so that's doing some work there with the title. Because that's a quick question that I imagine anyone learning or teaching the poem might want to ask, is like, oh, why 13 ways? And I think it's just because that's a very it's not just three. It's a large. It's illustrative of the idea that there's innumerable ways of looking at a blackbird. But two, I think he settled on that because 13 has like a Kabbalistic connotation to it, and that's really interesting.
So perhaps we're unsettled from the beginning of reading it.
Yeah.
How about we get into a reading of it?
Dan, do you want to go ahead and favor us with a pass through the poem?
Sure, I would love to. 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird by Wallace Stevens. 1. Among 20 snowy mountains, the only moving thing was the eye of the blackbird. 2. I was of 3 minds, like a tree in which there are 3 blackbirds. 3. The blackbird whirled in the autumn winds. It was a small part of the pantomime. 4. A man and a woman are one. A man and a woman and a blackbird are one. 5. I do not know which to prefer, the beauty of inflections or the beauty of innuendos, the blackbird whistling or just after. 6. Icicles filled the long window with barbaric glass. The shadow of the blackbird crossed it to and fro. The mood traced in the shadow an indecipherable cause. 7. O thin men of Haddam, why do you imagine golden birds? Do you not see how the blackbird walks around the feet of the women about you? 8. I know noble accents and lucid, inescapable rhythms, but I know too that the blackbird is involved in what I know. 9. When the blackbird flew out of sight, it marked the edge of one of many circles. 10. At the sight of blackbirds flying in a green light, even the bawds of euphony would cry out sharply. 11. He rode over Connecticut in a glass coach. Once, a fear pierced him, in that he mistook the shadow of his equipage for blackbirds. 12. The river is moving. The blackbird must be flying. 13. It was evening all afternoon. It was snowing, and it was going to snow. The blackbird sat in the cedar limbs.
Lovely. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a lot, in some ways, a darker poem than I remembered. At least the mood this time around, reading it
Yeah, I think
almost
there's
felt
some
like
ominous stuff in there.
ominous is
you know?
a good word. It felt a little ominous.
And I think
and
you
with
can
the
really
counting.
feel, when you do an oral reading of it, when you're reading it out loud, you can really hear the way that all these variations, as the numbers are piling up, you can really like feel the weight of this blackbird imagery like accruing on you, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is getting, and there's like he weaves in a few like lighter ones, like, do you not see the blackbird at the feet of the women around, why do you worship these golden bird, like there's lighter ones, but there's but there's some, it's spooky at the end when the man is an equipage is a carriage, by the way, for any listeners that are not born in 1875 or whatever, but it's a coach, a horse-drawn, or it's a predecessor to a car, essentially, and and to mistake the shadow that's cast by his moving vehicle for black, that's very spooky to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it felt like, visually, those old-fashioned like picture slides where you click it and it slides onto the next projected slide.
Magic lantern, maybe, or
something like that, where it kind of feels like that, where you get a glimpse of something that's sort of black and white and dark, and then you click the thing and it slides over to the next one, and all of them maybe are from the same collection of photographs or the same place, but you're not really sure exactly what's tying them together, but except for maybe these little birds that are dispersed through it.
Yeah.
Right.
I like that idea of the different images flashing in front of you.
Yeah, not quite long enough for you to kind of get your mind around the whole thing. But before that happens, the next one is assaulting you, and then and you're sort of left with like I said, up top. There's this like series, this series of fractured images, but when it's the accrual of all these fractures that makes the ultimate image at the end of the poem. I think that's really fascinating. It's a real deconstruction of how to look at anything. I think we talk about the image poem, where which is a classic idea of a poem where you're just focused on an object or an image or an animal or something like that, and you're and this is obviously that, of course, but it's blown up, but it's multiple. It's cubism in literary form.
I was going to mention cubism when you're talking about the different views and all these different explosions of views of things. That made me think of cubism, Picasso, and different whole ways of looking at one image, but it shows you multiple things in that one look and that one glance. And so
Right.
Well, to cut to the chase of this podcast a little bit, in a poem like this, where's the poetic turn?
Is there a poetic turn?
Is there a turn? What maneuvers are happening here? What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, I think there's at least 13 turns in this poem, honestly. I think it's, I think that, like we were saying a moment ago here, the fact that as soon as you think you have a grip on one of these pictures that you're looking at, the viewfinder slides, and you're suddenly thrust into the next one, and it's not like there's no clear relations between them. So it is a bit jarring, but I think this poem is just it's like a downhill slalom. It's swerving all over the place. I think as soon as you get a vibe of like, oh, this is the Blackbird, this is the feeling that we're going for. It's like click onto the next one, and I think that motion itself is the sort of dynamism of the poem.
If I could throw out a possible turn, there's a lot of movement and there's flight, and then that last part 13. So the river is moving, the blackbird must be flying, and then 13. It was evening all afternoon. It was snowing. It was going to snow. The blackbird sat in the cedar limbs. So there's movement, and then there's stillness in that last one.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because it starts with the only moving thing was the eye of the blackbird.
Yeah,
there is a lot
that's
of motion.
that's interesting. That's a very good point. I think most of these are motion based, right? Yeah,
They're gerunds, blackbird whistling. There's action. There's things happening. Yeah, the shadow of the blackbird crossed it to and fro. Yeah, so.
yeah. And I think and there's just some. Just the like a lot of it is very unexpected and is there's surprises all over the place when you're reading some of these. The mood traced in the shadow, an indecipherable cause. Like what does that mean? There's so many phrases in here that are just like. He just drops this on you, and you're just left to ponder, like, huh.
But it's not completely opaque. It's not like John Ashbery is
right.
Is
It's
celebrated
not word salad, but but it's it's so mystical in places where you're just like, oh my
Buddhist.
gosh.
Yeah.
It's very like profound in its simplicity.
Well, it kind of utilizes a consistent fitting surprise, where it's both surprising and inevitable, but just on a smaller scale and more consistently. Because a lot of the poems that I love and that we've read here have one turn at the very end that feels surprising and inevitable. But this sort of uses that all throughout, and so with each one, it surprises you a little, but it also feels a little bit inevitable.
Right. Yes, I think like the fourth one, a man and a woman are one. Like that's okay. So far, so good. That's a mystical-ish phrase, but it's not like
unfathomable.
Unfathomable is something we've heard before. It's it's in marriage vows and such. A man and a woman and a blackbird is the third line. It's all on one line. And you're just like, oh my gosh! And then a man and a woman and a blackbird are one, and it's like,
what?
It's like, what? Yeah. Like that's I'm a little stifled by the profundity of it actually, where I'm not even saying something too intelligible about it. But yeah, I do just kind of want to be like, huh? A man and a woman are one. A man and a woman and a blackbird are one.
Yeah. Well, it does feel a little bit like, there is that, in one of these, the fear of it, of the shadow piercing him. It feels like the blackbird is pierced into these different images. Like the blackbird is never just easily part of something. It feels like it's jabbed in, and it feels occasionally unnatural or uneasy, and that's a great one where a man and a woman and a blackbird are one, and it feels like the blackbird just is pricked in or jabbed into this, and there is a bit of fear there.
Yeah.
So the other interesting thing about, there's myriad interesting things as we've been discussing, but I think the sort of the demonstrability of the poem itself, I think, is really fascinating to me. Just like as somebody who writes and practices poetry on the regular here, I think that you can see, like, this is an empowering poem to me. I think that 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird, you can imagine putting this in a classroom, and you can, and you would say, like, okay, you read the poem, you discuss it like the three of us have been doing, and then you say, okay, now your turn, 13 ways of looking at blank. And you can,
Yeah.
and I don't know about you guys, but I feel like immediately like empowered to say, like, oh my gosh, I could do that about my laptop. I could do that
Yeah.
about my cup of coffee. I could do that
Yeah.
about my dog, or, it seems like it almost democratizes the process to me in a way that I feel like is very special. That, when you read poems in anthology, is that especially in the like high school era curriculum, you're like, oh, well, this is like a special talent that certain people have, or they had in the 1800s, but now, but this poem, this poem is from the collection that it was first in, I think was published in 1922. So, this poem is 104 years old, but it sounds very modern to me. It doesn't sound
Yes.
it doesn't sound like it's of that era to me. It sounds like this could be in Poetry Magazine today,
And you mentioned equipage, but for the most part, everything is very understandable. Everything is very. We can grasp it today in 2026.
Yeah, the words are simple. It's very clear. Like I said, I do think that he was probably into a lot of haiku. He's probably reading some Basho and whatnot, and like, oh, I love the sort of idea of simple, clean, clear imagery.
Yeah.
And that's all over the place. And I just, there's just so much in it. I just think it's really fascinating. Like I said, as a poem itself, but also like as a tool, as a poem machine, as a poem making rubric, it really has a lot to offer. It just makes understanding what we're doing poetically when we're trying to find new ways of looking at the same old thing. It's like here's a textbook of that, like here's a quick breakdown of how you could do that with the simplest object or creature or what have you. So I think it's fascinating. Yeah.
How about we hear it again? Evan, do you want to do a reading of this for us?
This is 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird by Wallace Stevens. 1. Among 20 snowy mountains, the only moving thing was the eye of the blackbird. 2. I was of 3 minds, like a tree in which there are 3 blackbirds. 3. The blackbird whirled in the autumn winds. It was a small part of the pantomime. 4. A man and a woman are one. A man and a woman and a blackbird are one. 5. I do not know which to prefer, the beauty of inflections or the beauty of innuendos, the blackbird whistling or just after. 6. Icicles filled the long window with barbaric glass. The shadow of the blackbird crossed it to and fro. The mood traced in the shadow an indecipherable cause. 7. O thin men of Haddam, why do you imagine golden birds? Do you not see how the blackbird walks around the feet of the woman about you? 8. I know noble accents and lucid, inescapable rhythms, but I know, too, that the blackbird is involved in what I know. 9. When the blackbird flew out of sight, it marked the edge of one of many circles. 10. At the sight of blackbirds flying in a green light, even the bawds of euphony would cry out sharply. 11. He rode over Connecticut in a glass coach. Once a fear pierced him, in that he mistook the shadow of his equipage for blackbirds. 12. The river is moving. The blackbird must be flying. 13. It was evening all afternoon. It was snowing, and it was going to snow. The blackbird sat in the cedar limbs.
Wonderful.
Ooh, mic
Thank
drop.
you.
Awesome. Yeah. Do you guys have a favorite segment?
Oh, yes.
That's a good question.
Well, you know, one thing that stood out to me that I didn't even catch in this first one, it was evening all afternoon. It was evening all afternoon.
Oh, yeah. That's
Yeah. How badass is
snowing.
that? You know, we're all from the same area here. I think in December, I think that line all the time when it's, you know, dark at 3:30 here and
Yeah.
near the
in
winter
Chicago,
solstice.
Illinois.
Yeah. It was snowing and it was going to snow. You know, like that,
Yeah.
like, oof, like that's hardcore.
And something is overseeing all of it. The blackbird sitting in the cedar limbs. Yeah. That was one line that really did stand out, because I was like, evening all afternoon. I just, it brushed over me, because in my head it corrected it to just being, it was evening all the time, or it was evening all night.
Right.
You know,
Well,
but
I think what stuck out to me this time through is I know noble accents, I know lucid, inescapable rhythms, but I know too, dude, the blackbird is involved in what I know. So,
yeah.
and is it everything he knows? Certainly the stuff we're talking about, and nature, but I
Yeah.
know too that the blackbird is involved in what I know. Does that mean is it just a tiny part of everything I know? Is it, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I love that
I
line.
love that as well. Yeah, I think it's hard not to pick number 8 as the favorite. It's so beautiful, and it's so funny too. Like you said, Darren, it's very like new agey in a funny way too. Where you're just like, the blackbird is like involved, man. You know,
Everything I know, man, there's a blackbird there somewhere, dude.
It's so great. I mean, considering the time when it was written, I just think
Yeah.
like that must have sounded so like out there in 1922 or whatever, to just be like, bro, like, this sort of like freshman philosophy dorm room poetics of it, you know. And I say that very I mean, I'm not criticizing, but I just think that's very funny in 100 years later.
Yeah.
It's so great though. Yeah, I love it.
Well, like always happens when I talk about poetry with Evan Carlson on this podcast, I always have this renewed and elevated appreciation for whatever work we're involved with, and an appreciation and excitement about the poetry that I did not know I was going to have. And today's poetry, today's chosen work is no exception to that.
Well, I feel the same way, because, you know, this is a, like you said, Dan, a very anthologized poem. And anthologized sometimes means that something becomes almost dead,
Right, not useful
or,
anymore.
You know, and so it you know, I've this you're bringing it here, and your first reading of it and talking about it, it brought some life to it that I hadn't seen before, and a bit of an edge that I hadn't noticed before. And it's not just, you know, 13 ways of looking at a blackbird, a few images about blackbirds. You know, it does have a bit of a sharpness to it and an uneasiness that I really kind of love, that I just hadn't seen before. I listened to it and read it out loud myself.
And for everybody listening, I should always say this at the beginning of the podcast. I'll say it now. Make sure you like, share, tell your friends about the Poetic Turn. But please, please read this poem for yourself. We're going to give you access to a link where you can find the poem on the Poetry Foundation website, is where I think I'll put in the show notes, and read this poem over for yourself and have your own thoughts about blackbirds and what this poem means to you, or what is there a segment you like, or is there if you read it through one time, and then on subsequent readings, do you get something different from it? Is it okay that maybe things are not as clear to you immediately, or can you have your own? Does that ambiguity give you your own take on a poem that's been around for a long time?
Well, if you're really inspired, you could do what Dan suggested and try your hand at your own 13 ways of looking at something.
That's right.
Fill in the
13
blank.
ways of looking at this pencil in my hand right now.
Yeah.
13 ways of looking at a carrot, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, anything. Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, if you're so moved, take it on board and try it. I think it's very approachable. These segments are not 70 lines long. They're 2, 3, 4 lines long. It's like a get in, get out. Think of an image, jot it down, do it a couple more times, and see if they talk to each other. I think the combinatory power of a poem like this is it's super fun. So yeah, if anybody wants to give it a shot, just for fun, I would say go for it.
This reminds me of our recent guest Jenny Beneman, who's a haiku writer, expert, amazing writer of haiku, and she's created an entire event and community around haiku called the Haiku Milieu, and she does share from time to time these poems that are groups of haiku around one subject, or just a reason for having haiku all together. And so the haiku-like nature of this poem reminded me of Jenny Beneman's work with multiple haikus making up one poem.
Yeah, well, it is interesting because it feels almost like how we think, where there are these little things that do get tied together. But when your mind is racing, it's not always just one solid line of thought, but perhaps more haiku-like.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know about you guys, but I always have more than one train of thought running at once, it seems to me, and this is very indicative. This is very evocative of that, I think.
That kind of a pattern of thinking, yeah.
Yeah, which is also very modern. It's like, there's not just one narrative. There are many, it's almost prefiguring the sort of postmodern era that we find ourselves in now, where there's a lot of registers at once. There's some high, there's some low, there's a lot of discourse going on, there's a lot of chatter.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much. This has been terrific. Again, I didn't know what this would be. I wasn't finding a way to get into this poem, and now I feel very connected to it. I want to read it again and again and explore the different segments, and maybe find my own 13 ways into some subject. And can't think of a better person to help us with this. Dan Smart, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Dan.
Turn.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure. And ladies and gentlemen, please like, share, as I've said already once on this this recording. Tell people about the Poetic Turn if you want to let people know about what we do here. And thank you for listening. For Evan Carlson, I'm Darren Stevens. Thank you, Dan Smart. And we will see you next time on The Poetic Turn.